So yesterday we were on this slide here talking about the modes of political participation. If you remember, this is a list of modes or types, and this list is from most common and easiest kind of to do down to least common and most difficult. And we were talking yesterday about, we talked about voting, and we talked about contacting politicians, and we were on communicate, I believe, when we ended the class yesterday. And so with communicate, what we're talking about here is communication that goes on between citizens, whether that's direct, one-on-one kind of thing, or family events, or discussions about political reports or political stories coming through the media that you pick up and you talk to others. This is a two-way communication between citizens that might or might not be voters, right? But it's part of that idea that we're going to have discussion. We're going to have some enlightened understanding. We're going to have some work going on in our society that helps keep us informed about what our government's doing and how we mesh with that and what we think about it. And so anytime you are engaged in this, right, and it's good, right, for democracy as a whole. It's good for you as an individual. It's a little difficult. I mean, sometimes, we're a little skittish maybe about getting involved into discussions about politics, and it's one of those topics that can get a little excited pretty quick. And as it seems, we've seen more division grow in our society. Communication about politics and about what's going on has kind of gotten a little more exciting as well, or exciting for some people, scary for others, right? It makes you kind of stand off and not even want to talk about it. But it is a form of participation, that you're having this deliberation with other folks, and you're involved in actively discussing and thinking about and considering policy and politics and parties and interest groups and whatever it is that's motivating that political communication. And so we have to recognize that this is very important, and it's one of the reasons things, the different social medias we use are so important, because they do facilitate communication. They don't always facilitate the best communication, right? Or the most sincere and the most polite communication, but they do facilitate communication, and that's their draw. And there's a lot of different ways electronically for us to get involved in this, and so that's good if we're using it for that. It would be better, of course, if we were using it and we're using it in the same way that we would generally when we're speaking face to face. I think there's a little deterioration in the norms and the politeness and behavior that we have when we get behind the monitor instead of talking directly to someone. And we need that kind of civic engagement and approach that we would have face to face. We need to keep that as we communicate in different ways. But the point here is that this is a valid mode of political participation. It is critical to democracy that it happens, and it's something that we want to be able to point at and recognize and identify as something important to our process. It's easy, right, to understand, and it's a little more difficult to do, but it's pretty easy to understand what we're talking about here. The next mode of participation is taking us out of I'm a voter and I want to talk about stuff, or I want to talk to somebody about something, or I want to cast my vote. The next one is I'm a citizen and I want to start playing a part in the political process. And working and joining and volunteering for political campaigns or issue campaigns. So what we're talking about here is that you're now going beyond I'm going to talk about stuff and I'm going to cast my vote. And you're moving into the arena of I'm going to be actively, physically engaged in the political process. I'm going to campaign for something or someone or both, which means getting up off the couch and getting out of the house and volunteering your time and your effort and supporting something, right? Visibly, right? Being out there and doing it. And so getting involved in a political campaign of some kind is a very positive step for voters to take, because it actually, right now, they've become a participant in the actual inner workings of the democracy. They're not just using the processes of democracy, they're actually helping run them, right? Helping run someone, run a campaign, or helping someone or a group, right, move forward with an issue or a concern, protesting, making phone calls, getting out and knocking on doors, right? Participating with the political party. I mean, at the point you're doing this, you're engaging in the campaign, political campaigning. You've taken a pretty big step forward to putting yourself out there and getting involved in the democratic process. And I would encourage people to do this, right? There's, regardless of your political beliefs, regardless of which party you might affiliate with, all of them need more people to help. So anybody that says, "Hey, I'm here and I want to help, what can I do?" Whether you're talking about an issue campaign or a political campaign, right? Organizations behind that are going to take you in and find you something to do. Right? They need people to help do this kind of stuff. And so if you want to get involved, there are plenty of opportunities once you get to this level to really get involved and to step up. Does that make sense? And the next step of complexity that we take is we move to what's called a status of participation called community activist. And someone that is a community activist is doing all four of these things here that we've already mentioned. They're voting, they're contacting politicians, they're talking to people, they're involved in campaigns, whether it be issue or party campaigns, right, election campaigns. They are someone that is trying to ensure that their community is present and active in getting involved in politics, and is not only trying to make a difference, but also trying to receive the benefits of being an active community. And so a community activist is that person that's trying to motivate a group of people, right, their community, to get out and to be involved. And then if while they're doing that, they're also trying to look out for the political nature of that community, the political issues of that community. Probably, you know, if you were wanting to point at a community activist, right? We had one, a very famous one recently. Anybody know of anybody that was identified as a community activist? Sometimes that was said in a bad way about this person, but probably one of the most famous, right, community activists was Barack Obama. That's where he started his political career, right, as a community activist in Chicago. And that, right, activism, right, got him eventually running for office. Obviously, at the end of the day, he served 2 terms as president. But that's where he started, right, as a community activist, somebody that was trying to get the community that he lived in and worked in and involved in politics and looking out for themselves and taking their issues before city governments or local governments to fight on behalf of his community and to speak out on behalf of his community. And that low level of community activism is what launched him off. And most of our politicians, if you look at it, they probably get involved at much lower levels, looking after some very local issues or very local campaign elections, right, that are going on. And they're like, hey, I'm going to get involved in this, right? And it builds and it snowballs. And so, it moves on. But it's getting involved in just a campaign, helping somebody get elected is a short term thing, or helping an issue get its attention is probably a short term thing. Someone that's a community activist is going to be doing this continually. This is going to be an active part of their life, that they're going to be looking after what's going on in their community politically and what they need to get involved with to try to make a difference. You step up one more level and you start moving into the realm of protesting. And protesting is one of those very much protected freedom of expression actions that we have. But it takes a pretty solid level of commitment for someone to say, not only am I going to vote for something or talk about this issue or contact my politician about this issue or maybe go door to door knocking, but I'm gonna actually get publicly involved and protest what needs to be changed or what we're working for, and get out and and be a part of this in public. And that comes with some exposure, maybe some risk, and so it's another level of intensity higher, where you're saying, I'm not just going to go through the proper channels to try to get things changed or get things done. I'm going to escalate that and make it a public issue, and maybe go beyond just legal protesting, because protesting in and of itself is a very broad area. When we look at those folks that protest, there's three distinct levels of protest that we can identify and talk about. And the first one, is the one it's absolutely protected by freedom of expression in the First Amendment, and that's to get out and protest against your government or to your government about the change that you want, And that freedom of expression is, as we've talked about earlier, is very much a protected kind of action, because it's an extension of free speech. And while if you're doing that in the right way and you're getting a permit through the city or whatever to organize that protest and to make that protest, you're following all the proper steps there. That's legal protest, but and that's great, right? It's a good thing. It draws attention. It gets people fired up. It gets the focus on what's going on. But there are two other levels of protest that we also need to discuss. That take even a little more commitment on the part of an individual to participate politically. The first is a form of protest we refer to as civil disobedience. And civil disobedience is a form of protest that we see most often associated with civil rights protest, because that's where it's been exercised probably the most, and it's been effective. Right? But and you've got the example that was set here by Martin Luther King and the marchers, right, during the civil rights movement. Most of what they were doing revolved around the idea of civil disobedience. So let me give you a little bit of a definition or a taste of what we're talking about. Civil disobedience is going to do two things at least at one time. Right, and they're a little contradictory, but they make sense when you put it all together. It is a form of protest, but it is a form of protest where there is a law that is considered unjust, and the protest, civil disobedience part of it, is going to be to actively break that unjust law, right, to demonstrate to society that law is unjust. And the kind of odd part, and maybe even somewhat contradictory part of it, is that you will then voluntarily pay the price of breaking that law. Because the punishment that comes with breaking an unjust law is what drives home the message that the law is unjust. When people hear, oh, you broke this law and they punished you this way, that's the part that drives home how important the law being protested needs to be paid attention to, and then how much you're dedicated, right, to illustrating the injustice of this law. The other part of it is when you break the unjust law and then submit to pay the legal penalty for breaking the law, you're saying, look, I am normally a law-abiding citizen. I want society to have good laws. I want people to follow the laws. But this law here is unjust. And I'm breaking it to show you that it's unjust. But then I'm going to pay the penalty for breaking it to demonstrate to you the type of person that I am, that I'm doing this consciously, that I understand, right, not following the law is a big deal, and I'm going to pay the price, right? So when you see, right, the films of Martin Luther King and the marchers and civil rights, this is what they were doing. They were breaking unjust laws nonviolently for the most part, and then getting arrested and going to jail, not trying, right, to resist the arrest or hurt the officers, because doing that part of it drove home, right, the seriousness of what they were engaged in, and that they wanted people to understand they're trying to change the law. They're not trying to tear down society, right? Because, and that's the important part on the back end of civil disobedience, is that you do pay the penalty so that people understand, right, the depth of your commitment. You know, the letter that we get from Martin Luther King Jr., written from, a letter from Birmingham jail, right? It carries the moral weight that it carries because that letter is written while he's, right, paying the cost of breaking an unjust law and writing this out, saying, here's why we have to do things this way, and why you have to be an upstanding citizen on both ends of it, even though you're breaking this law in the middle. So civil disobedience is a pretty complex action, and it carries with it a lot of moral weight if you do it correctly. It is a form of protest, right? But it's not just we got a permit and we're going to march and protest and we want you to hear our voice. It's much more serious than that, right? And it carries a lot more weight. Not that the other is trivial, right? But it's a step up, right, in what you're trying to do. And so folks that protest, and while they're doing it, are intentionally breaking the unjust law they're protesting, and then, right, paying the penalty of breaking that law, whatever that might be, is driving home a serious lesson. And so it takes an awful lot of commitment to do that, right? You're not just getting out there and protesting. You're going to have to, either go to jail or pay a fine, or maybe, whatever the case is going to be, that would be the punishment on the books for that crime. And as you're paying that cost, right, it escalates and elevates the message that's being sent out about the law that you're breaking, and hopefully gets people to realize that, wow, that law is not right, and if people are willing to break it and pay this cost, shows how deep this feeling goes, that we need to look at this and consider this as a legal change. So civil disobedience is there in the middle. It's the second of the two forms of protest. So you've got straight up, right, get a permit, go protest, march down the street, let your voice be heard. You've got the civil disobedience that's out there, that's trying to change an unjust law by breaking it and then submitting themselves to society to pay the appropriate penalty. The third is illegal protest that is not in the vein of civil disobedience. It is breaking the law because you think the law is wrong and you're just not going to follow it. And maybe what the law is protecting or encouraging is something that you're trying to bring down. So this is straight up kind of just illegal action, right? However, it still is carrying a political message, right? If it's still carrying a political message, it is still a form of political protest. So let me give you some examples of what we're talking about that fit into this third version of protesting that's illegal, but does carry a political message. I'll give you the most extreme one first. Okay, um, political assassination, right? Somebody shoots, kills somehow a political figure. They assassinate a political figure, right? A president, a prime minister, a senator, right? We've seen people try to do this. We've seen some be successful. A wholly illegal act. The folks that are doing it are not intending, right, to be caught. But the action they're taking carries a very profound and easily understood political message. Right? It is a political protest. It is now. It's not protected in any sense, like legal protest is. It's not a protected political action, right? But a political assassination would definitely count as a committed act of political participation. We don't want to encourage that, but we have to recognize that it's there. Now, where you will see it more often, it's not such an extreme case, is where you see actions that are occurring in society that are considered legal, that the law backs up as legal, and another group of people are trying to make that action either illegal or to stop it from happening, and are committed to the point that they're willing to break the law to try to stop that from happening. And we see quite a bit of this in both animal ethical animal treatment kind of stuff and environmental and conservation kind of actions, right? So I'll give you a little bit on the environmental side, right? There are environmental interest groups, protest groups out there that are, right, very much concerned that we are going beyond a tipping point that we'll be able to recover from in the environment with what we're doing. If you go out far west, you'll see some of these groups that have chosen particular parts of the environment that they're going to try to protect, like an old growth forest, which is a forest that's never been used as timber before, right? It's always been a forest. It's always been kind of untouched. Those old growth forests are usually on public lands that have belong to the state or to the national government, and quite often, especially if it's federal land, they will contract out to logging corporations to go in and log some of those old growth forests because that particular timber is very, very much in demand. It brings in a lot of money. It's very useful. And so the federal government who owns the land opens up a bidding process and awards some logging company the rights to go in and right, fell the timber on a certain piece of federal property. The environmental groups are looking at this old growth forest, and from their perspective on the environmental side of things, this is an irreplaceable resource. Right? Once an old growth forest is cut down, whatever grows back might still be trees and might still be useful, but it's a completely different environmental biome. It's completely different habitat, and it will never be the way it was. So, and they make a very good case for where they're coming from on this. That once you log an old growth forest, it's gone forever. Where there that you logged it, forever being long enough that we won't be around to know when something grows up there different. And so for them, this is not a situation where it's a battle you can lose. If you lose, that forest is gone forever. So they're willing to go beyond the law to protest what is a completely legitimate and legal action on behalf of both the government and the company that bid and won that bid to log that. So they will do things like go up in the trees that are in the forest, right, and live in them, so that so they're trespassing and they're preventing this logging company from bringing the trees down, because if they did, it would kill somebody, and they don't want. That's not good for anybody, PR or anything else. And so you'll see every now and then, right, somebody will be up in the trees for 2 or 3 months, right? They'll take stuff up and live in the trees. Um, Another tactic that was used quite a bit in the Pacific Northwest was what was called tree spiking. So environmental groups, right, would sneak onto the property before the trees had been logged, and they would drive big, long metal spikes through the trunks of the trees. And then they'd put signs up saying, "We spiked these trees." Now, that act of tree spiking pretty much renders that timber worthless to a logging company, right? Because they can't run the risk of logging that tree, and as they're making lumber out of it, right, running a saw blade into a big, large spike that's through the tree somewhere that they can't see or get out. And so it makes the whole process costly and risky. But in the legal side of that, they basically ruined property that had been sold to this timber company, right? And so they destroyed property from the legal side of things. From the environmental side of things, they're preserving this non-renewable resource that the world needs, and so, right, they're willing to break the law to do this. And so that's the kind of protest that we're talking about. Now, they are not going to stand around and wait for someone to show up the next day and arrest them, right? They're just destroying the property in that sense and moving on, right? Hopefully to escape and fight another day and spike another forest. So that's completely illegal activity. But it's carrying a political protest, right? A political message. It's trying to get people to realize that this policy issue is important, and maybe more important than the profit side of it, that's going the other way. And so, right, but it's not civil disobedience, and it's certainly not the legal type of protest that we talk about. So those are three different ways of protesting that all fit under this mode of political participation. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about the differences and why it's important to understand that? All right, if you're typing and I'm moving too quick, go ahead and get that. If you've got a question or something, pop it up in there, and I'll get to it. I'll come back to it. The last mode of political participation here is called the complete activist mode. This is an individual that would do any and all of the previous 6 modes of political participation, right? All of these can be seen as probably inclusive of the action prior to it, right? Those folks that contact politicians probably vote. Those people that are going to talk and communicate about politics are apt to vote and maybe contact, so all of these can be inclusive. But the complete activist is willing to do everything legal and the extra legal stuff as well, right? So, and they're not going to limit themselves to protesting. They're going to be doing all of these things. So this is just I'm so involved in all the government and the issue and the politics. all of these things are what I do. This is right. Maybe this is my hobby or something. I don't know. But these are the different ways that we can kind of categorize or put into a modality different types of political participation. Any questions? All right, moving on. So now that we've talked about some of the modes of participation, we're going to categorize those modes of participation into 2 types: conventional and unconventional modes of participation. And then we're going to talk about the motivations that are out there that move us from not getting involved, to getting involved, to seriously getting involved. And that's what this slide is about here. It looks at two motivating factors for people that get them involved in politics in some form or fashion. And these two perspectives are political trust and political efficacy. And I've got that shortened there on the slide, but it's EFFICACY, efficacy, which means basically a belief in your effectiveness, your belief in your political effectiveness. Over here, people refer to it as being efficacious sometimes. So political efficacy is your belief that you can make a difference, that you can be effective if you get involved. The other element here is political trust. This is the trust you have that your political system is open to your participation and will respond to your participation, right? The trust you have that your system is open and responsive to you getting involved in participating in politics. So let's start at the top right here, right where we have high political trust and high political efficacy. What this means is, as an individual, you believe your government gives you plenty of opportunity to participate, and that if you choose to participate, you can make a difference, right? So you've got a high level of political trust, right? My government has given me the ability to vote and to contact and to read information and to talk to people and to protest, right? All of these things are open to me as ways to participate. And I know, because I know me, that if I chose to get involved politically, in whatever one of those or all of those versions of participation I chose to get involved in, I would make a difference, right? I would be able to move the needle, right? If that's the case, right, you think your system of government is opening doors for you to get involved and you believe you can make a difference, then the type of political participation you're going to probably get yourself involved in is conventional participation. And conventional participation is that participation that people expect citizens to get involved in. That is fairly normal. So if we were to back up and look at our modes, oops, too far, right? Probably from voting through at least the first version of protesting would all be very conventional. Voting, we encourage people to do that all the time. Should you contact your politicians? Absolutely. Talk about politics? Great. Get involved with campaigns? There's all kinds of stuff that would encourage you to do that. Look out and be involved in your government, do legal protesting, all of that, right? All of that is very conventional kind of mode of participation. And if you think you can make a difference and you think your government's giving you the opportunity to make a difference, that's where you're going to go, because that's right. It makes sense. You're not going to probably believe that you need to do civil disobedience or illegal protesting, right? Because your government, you trust that it's going to let you get in and make a difference in the normal ways of participation. So someone that's got a high level of political trust and a high level of political efficacy is probably going to get involved in conventional behavior. Well, okay, so that's a good question, Brittany. How is it that, how would they let people know they need volunteers? So they being political parties or interest groups or, right? Okay. They're asking all the time, but most of the time they're going to be relying upon their folks to come in contact with somebody and have a discussion and say, oh, well, you're interested in that? You should come with me, right? But if you haven't run into somebody from a political party like that, or you haven't run into somebody from an interest group that might be something that spurs you to action, they're always open to you just saying, hey, I'd like to volunteer. Can you use me? Right? I'd like to join your group. and I guarantee you that the doors are open, right? I've never had any political organization when someone says, "Hey, I like what you're doing. I'd like to get involved." They go, "Oh, no, thank you." Right? That's not how it works. They're like, "Bring your warm body in here and let us give you something to do," right? Because they always need more people. Political parties, right? They're running on volunteers. Interest groups are running on members. So interest groups are going to want you to pony up a membership fee, right? And then there'll be opportunities for their members to volunteer to work within the interest group. Um, Anybody that's organizing a march or organizing some kind of community events always, once they start trying to put that together, are looking for volunteers. So in some sense, most of these require you to be a little on the proactive side, but not much, right? um, because you're going to have to figure out what group resonates with what you want to be involved in, and then after you figure that out and you make an initial contact, they'll be happy to have you, right? And so the people that believe that they can make a difference this way, that there are enough groups out there that are opening doors, there are opportunities in government, whatever, they're going to get involved in conventional kinds of behavior. So let's move down and let's talk about people with high political trust but low political efficacy. These are folks that they look at the system, the groups out there, the parties out there, the opportunities out there with their government. And they go, my government does a pretty good job. These groups are pretty effective. They make a difference. So my trust level is high, right? My trust level is such that I think that if anybody wanted to get involved, they could make a difference. However, I don't think I could, right? There's the low level of political efficacy. Or if I manage to motivate myself to try to get involved in something, I'm just not someone that makes a big difference. I might play a little part here or there, but it's going to take somebody that's got more belief in themselves to really shake the tree and get things going. But they do have a positive perspective of the way the system is set up and the players and the parties and the groups. To think that to have trust that the system responds to those folks that get involved. So if these people did get motivated to get involved, then they would get involved in conventional politics because that trust level tells them, things will happen if we get involved, just not maybe when I get involved because I'm not going to make a difference, right? So their lack of political efficacy lowers their expectations about how successful they would be, although they believe the system is open enough for people to get involved and make a difference. They don't feel shut out or that they're going to have to overcome, right, the political machinery to make things happen. Moving across on the bottom to folks with low political efficacy and low political trust. These are people that don't think they can make a difference and don't think the system is set up to let them make a difference. So, right, even if we could change the system, I'm not going to make a difference, right? So I'm not going to even get involved, right? My participation won't move the needle, and I'm not willing to believe that the system's going to let me get out there and try to move the needle, right? So these people, right, with low political efficacy and low political trust, they don't believe anything could happen, and they don't believe that they could ever make anything happen. So they sit on their couch and eat their Doritos and watch TV, right? They don't get involved. They probably don't vote because it's not going to make a difference, right? They don't have political conversations because who wants to have that conversation with them, right? They're certainly not going to ever get involved in campaigns because it's all the big money that makes a difference anyway. It's not the people knocking on our doors or making phone calls. So, right, and that's the kind of thought process that's going on with somebody with low political efficacy and low political trust. So for them, they're just going to opt out, right? They're just going to sit there and go, yeah, even if I wanted to make a difference, the system's set up against me and I can't. right? I wouldn't be successful. So high levels of trust and efficacy is conventional participation. High levels of trust and low levels of efficacy are still conventional participation. Low levels of trust and low levels of efficacy probably means sit on your tail and eat chips. And that brings us to the last group that's kind of the most interesting of the group. And those are the folks that have a low level of political trust, but a high level of political efficacy. In other words, the system's stacked against me, or it doesn't have enough opportunities for me to be able to get out and make a difference. But that's okay because I can shake the world anyway, right? I've got a big enough belief in my abilities to make a difference. It doesn't matter what other people think or what the system is set up like. I'm going to get out there and do what I need to do to make things happen. This is the type of perspective and idea that would lead someone to be, right, not just protesting, but illegally protesting. And civil disobedience is kind of in the middle of this. There's the person that believes in civil disobedience is going to practice it probably has at least a medium level of political trust because they're expecting their sacrifice, in a sense, to motivate other people to change the system so the system would pay attention to enough at some point. But the folks with low political trust and high political efficacy are like, I'm going to make the system change, right? When I do this, they will react, right? So these are the folks that are that are believe they can shake the world, right? And so they don't even have to have any trust, right? They're going to motivate themselves. They're going to do what they want to do, and they're going to expect that this will grab people, right, and make them pay attention in a sense. What do you think about that? Does it make sense? So this is kind of how we put it all together, right? And how we start looking at what people believe about the political system and what people believe about their own abilities in that system, and then what expectations that will drive for how we get involved politically. As you can see, right, 3/4 of these are either going to be, right, get involved in the conventional modes or don't get involved at all. And then, right, 1/4 of this, right, are the folks that are possibly going to be thinking outside, right, normal means of political engagement. And you see these people, right, every now and then. He's like, man, they must live all that politics, and they probably do, right? It's what they do. That might be their hobby or something. I don't know, but they're out there to change the world. And it's good. We need people to change the world. We just don't always need them to blow stuff up to do it. All right, so that's how we anticipate how people will get involved politically and what motivates them or why they're motivated to that type of participation, right? Which has you looking back at the modes of participation and then these perspectives that motivate them. Which brings us back, right, to our ideologies, right, and how those are ways that we start thinking about getting involved in government and the opportunities of political participation. Right, we talked about this at the beginning of the year when we talked about individual motivations, and that individuals might see themselves as liberals or libertarians or conservatives or populists, and their perspective of the government and what it's supposed to do. I bring this back up now because now we've talked about interest groups and political parties. So now we're talking about groups that get involved in politics. Different goals, but both of those goals have them involved in the political system, and they bring a lot of people with that are members of those groups to get involved politically. And so now, right, we want to look at these as not just a label that applies to somebody's individual political ideology, but also as, labels and perspectives for groups that are acting in government, and acting around government, around governmental policy. I don't think the next slide. No. So, right. It's important that we're able to see these ideologies work both at the individual level and as a group description and mobilization, motivation factor. So, we will continue to talk through the semester about these political ideologies and the groups that they motivate. And it's this point now when we start thinking about groups that we can start equating to some level liberals and Democrats, right, is the political party that's out there getting things done that tends to fall into that liberal area, and conservatives and Republicans, right? And then the populists and the libertarians fall into both of those political party groups on the fringes, right, of those political party groups. They don't fit in real nicely. You do have the Libertarian Party, which ideologically should be lining up with individual libertarians, although they have a hard time making it work. And the populists generally are split between the liberals and the conservatives, or I'm sorry, between the Democrats and the Republicans. When we look at the groups that are actively out there engaged in politics, right? So these ideologies that we described at the beginning of the semester that people have also function as descriptions of what is motivating groups to get involved. And so we need to be aware that we can talk about that in either way, either fashion. And so, as you watch people talk about what they think, or you talk groups bring forward political platforms about what they want to do as a group, it falls back into these same ideologies. Let's look at them, right? These right, what an ideology is, and we've talked about, right, forms of ideology in the sense of a conservative or a populist. Let's talk about ideology as a term itself, and as what it is and how it works, right? So political ideology is essentially a set of values, a set of beliefs about public policy that are coherent, right? And that's the key part of this, a coherent set of values or beliefs. There are any number of people out there that you can talk to, and or groups that you can go to and start talking to them about what their political ideology is. And 5 minutes in the conversation, you start getting confused because you hear things coming out that are not, they don't go together. There's a dissonance there. And you're like, this doesn't work, right? If you're going to chase this idea, you couldn't hold this value, right? And so that dissonance is a problem. And a political ideology doesn't have that dissonance, right? It is a coherent set of values and beliefs about public policy. So if we were to spend the time and effort as an individual or a group to cultivate our perspective on politics and what we want done and what we think government ought to do, what its goal is, how we're going to make that work, we could develop a coherent set of values, but we don't. It's hard, right? Here is a spectrum of the ideological sophistication scale, in a sense. So if the definition of political ideology is a coherent set of beliefs or values about political ideas, we'll start off by saying that those folks who actually are political ideologues, those folks that actually have a coherent set of beliefs and values about politics, is very small. Ideologues ideologues, when we talk to people, we can only identify about 10 to 12% of the population that actually have a coherent set of political beliefs. They are the right pointed minority in this sense, right? If only one, a little better than 1 out of 10 of us, have a coherent set of political perspectives, then that's not what's happening most of the time in our political system. These folks are, right, by the statistical percentages, odd, right? And the reason is it takes an awful lot of work, internal work on yourself and your perspective and your beliefs to figure all this out and to make it all line up with some consistency. The people that are able to do this are impressive, right? I am not one of these folks, even though I've done politics for a long, long time, but I have met a few, right? And the cool thing about ideologue is that you can throw any political issue you want at them, maybe, even one they haven't thought about. And in just a matter of moments, they can tell you what position they're going to take on it, why they're taking that position, and that position will fit in nicely with all the other things they have as their political beliefs. There will be a consistency there, a coherency between all their beliefs. They won't be saying, well, I believe this in this situation, but not when it's over here. That's not them. That's not how it works. So ideologues, right, have a set of beliefs about what government is for, the values of government, how society ought to work, and then the public policy stuff follows from that, right? So they get to the individual answers about issues from a grounded set of values that identifies who they are. Most of us don't do this kind of work, right? Because it makes it, you have to understand your political beliefs down to the core. And then when you work that out on the policy issues, right, you have to accept, right, if these are my core beliefs and they're absolutely rock solid, when I get out here, I'm working on this issue and I apply these beliefs, whatever comes out is the logical extension of those beliefs, and that's mine. So these folks tend to be viewed a lot of times as extremists because it's at the edges of the political spectrum that ideologues can find the easiest way to be consistent from their beliefs, right? That doesn't mean it's the only way, but most of the ideologues you're going to run into, of the few that are out there, are going to be people who have taken fairly extreme political positions and have been very consistent about it, right? And they're taking a position like it's always more important to protect the government as a whole over the individual, or invert that, right? Individual freedom is the highest value for an individual, for a person, right? And societies and governments need to respect that. Whereas others might pick something on the community scale, right? That humans only reach their highest potential when they're in a community environment that encourages and engages them to be, right. And those, if you go to the extremes, you'll clean that up pretty quick, and it'll make sense. It'll be a logical, coherent set of arguments, but your results may not always endear you to other folks that are trying to get things done, because you're going to be one of those folks that's, okay, here's what I believe, here's the black and white of it, this is the only thing that makes sense. Ideologues don't want to compromise, right? Because to compromise in a policy position means to compromise on their values. So it's, again, 12% of the folks are capable of doing this. Most of us fall into this group that we refer to as group benefit voters. And Right. This is about 42% of Americans when we talk to them, we figure out that what they're thinking about, right, when they approach politics and political groups and things like that is they've got in their mind the things that they like, maybe some general political ideas that they want to drive, right? But they're not wholly committed to a set of consistent beliefs. Their wants on individual issues might override a belief, right? It's like, well, yeah, I believe this, but this is good enough, or this is fine. It doesn't coherently match up, but it gets us where we're going. These are folks that can compromise, that can negotiate, that are willing to get the best of what's possible, because their values are negotiable, right? And so when we think we're in this group and we're thinking of politics, we bring with us this perspective of here are the things that I like for government to do that I think that are important. And generally speaking, I'm going to approach government that way, and I'm going to vote that way and policy that way. And this is a very rational kind of approach to practical politics, right? And most of us vote this way. Most of us decide the groups that we're going to join this way, right? When you've got a political system we do that's split between two major parties, none of the parties fit you exactly, right? So you're almost always in a situation of basing things on what you like the most, or I really like this, or this is pretty good, or it's good enough, or I really hate this. But it's not an absolute like you would with an ideologue, like where they can say, well, that doesn't even make sense. You can't make that argument, right? A group benefit voter can go, well, no, I can understand that maybe in the theoretical realm this doesn't make sense, but I like it. And so this is what we refer to as group benefit voters. In other words, they find the groups that benefit them policy wise close enough, and they go with it, right? And that's their level of sophistication on ideology, right? They know enough to pigeonhole themselves and to pick a group to be with, and that works for them well enough that they can go forward, right? Political scientists are always looking at these folks going, okay, you call yourself a Democrat, but what about this here that doesn't match up? Or you call yourself a Republican wouldn't do that, right? And that's because the political scientist has come at it kind of from that ideologue perspective, saying the position you're holding doesn't make sense. Well, if they're going to be fair about it, they don't always have to make sense, right? Sometimes we just like what we like, or sometimes we're more comfortable with what we're seeing, and we don't have to have it make perfect ideological sense. We saw a lot of this kind of justification for the folks that were voting against, say, Hillary Clinton in the last election, right? A lot of them were not Trump supporters. If you ask them, are you voting for Trump? The answer was no. They didn't support Trump. They didn't really like Trump. Trump doesn't give them any political reason to vote for him, but they did very much dislike Hillary Clinton and the politics that she brought with her and the attitude that she brought with her. And so those folks were saying, I can't associate with that, right? And so I'm going to go this direction. Now, those same folks that made that assertion 4 years ago, a good number of them are now going, Trump, I can't associate with that, right? So, because when you don't have clearly defined ideological perspectives, right, you're moving around a little bit, and you can find a place that makes you comfortable, find a place that makes you less uncomfortable, and a lot of us do it that way. Does this make sense? Okay, so let's move on to what we call the nature of the times voters. About a quarter of us approach politics from this perspective, this level of sophistication. And we're moving down. Right? Ideologues are the most sophisticated, group benefit voters, a little less sophisticated. Nature of the times voters, even a little less sophisticated than the two above them, right? Um, these folks associate themselves with politics and groups and politicians based upon how things are going for them right now. So it's a very transactional kind of approach to who you support or what you support. If your life is going well, then you're going to vote for groups and people and ideas that keep what's going well going well. And if your life right now doesn't seem to be going well, then you're going to vote for change, right? Because your vision or view of how all of this works is wrapped up in the very base level of a calculation of, is this good for me or bad for me? And so it's a very transactional, a very individualistic perspective. About a quarter of us approach politics this way. This is our level of political sophistication, right? Everything we evaluate runs through the filter of things going good, things going bad. They're good, we stay with it. If they're bad, we change, right? And that's not very sophisticated, right? There's not a long-term policy there, or there's not long-term governing ideas there. This is just how do I feel right now about how things are going? And the way you feel right now of how things go may not have much to do with the politics of the time or the policies that are being put into place, but you're going to act like they do because that's your filter, right? And so this allows people to show up at the polls or to associate with groups and stuff, but they don't put much effort into why they're doing that, or other than, is it working or not working for me? This is pretty straightforward. Again, about a quarter of us, 24% of us, this is how we evaluate how we're going to get involved and how we're going to act and what's going to work for us. The last group, just better than 20% of this group, we refer to as no issue content voters. These are folks that are not looking at any ideological perspective here at all. Not whether this policy is good for me, not whether this policy is good for us, not whether this policy makes coherent sense. They are simply looking at things going, I like it or don't like it. I feel this way, right? I mean, at least the nature of the Times voters are casting a little bit of a look on how things are for them, right? Not just how they feel, but, is this good for me? And they might, have a little bit more thought to it. But no issue content means exactly that. They're voting based off of, engaging in politics based off of, I like that or I don't like that. Why do you like that? Well, I don't know, but I just do. Okay, well, this is, a democratic situation, and you can certainly be motivated by what you like or don't like, but it's really hard for anybody to get a read on what that means other than what you like. And it's really hard to put together any kind of consistent policy decision-making process, to plan 5 or 10 years down the road, to budget, to do anything that a government's got to do if everybody out there is voting about how they feel because of which side of the bed they woke up on that day. Right? So there's no continuity, there's no ability to project, there's no ability to have any kind of persistent vision if your voters, to a large extent, are feeling voters. It doesn't mean that those folks are any less legitimate in what they feel and what they want. I mean, they are. This is how they feel. Right? You can't really tell them that they're wrong for having that feeling. But it doesn't provide anything sophisticated to the system so that the system can respond to that, right, more than just this instance right now. And so this is kind of bad for a democratic system, because it's mercurial. It's not based on any kind of standard, right? I mean, at least nature of the Times voters are looking at how things are kind of going overall, right? Is this a good process for me or a bad process for me? How, these folks that are going to be nature of the times voters in the presidential election are going to be going to that with a 4-year perspective, maybe, or maybe an 8-year perspective or something, right? We're saying, okay, well, it was good and then it was not good, or it was not good and now it is good. But at least they've got a little bit of continuity of how they're approaching it. But a no issue content voter doesn't have that, right? They may be just looking at, I can't tell these candidates apart one from the other, but that one dressed is nice, right? They seem put together. That one looks like, it's Bernie, looks like a slob. Can't vote for that, right? Or, hey, that's Bernie Sanders, looks like my grandpa. I like my grandpa, I'll vote for him. Okay, good, you voted. You supported something or somebody, but you see how it doesn't work to help move the system along so we can make decisions in the long term? There's nothing there, right? So there's no content. And unfortunately, more than, this 22% is more than 1 in 5, right? If you got 5 voters in a room, one of them is going to be approaching the system by, right? I think I like this team. I like this color. They're a donkey and they're an elephant. I like elephants, so I'll vote that way, right? Okay. Thanks for participating. Remember that enlightened understanding that government needs and democracy needs? These folks don't provide any of that with their votes and their participation. And that's bad long term for us. So when we look at the voter population, we look at the people engaged in politics, right? We can and talk to them about what's motivating them. The 4 groups that they fall into, from high levels of sophistication to low levels of sophistication, right? And you look back at these folks here, right, that would be subject to unconventional participation. Most of these folks, and then some of these folks over here, right, are political ideologues. The ones that have a high level of political efficacy are the ones that are eligible, right, to be in the ideologue category, because they're the ones that are going to put all the work together to figure out who they are and what they want, and how it all ties together and makes sense. That work? All right, these last few slides are just slides taken out of the text that show how our participation is changing over time, right? And so they're interesting that way. This one is showing over time how the political parties have become a little more distinct from one another, and there's more of a difference between the parties and their political values. And what we've seen, interestingly, over the same period of time is the larger group of people up here in the more recent periods telling us that neither party speaks for them, that they call themselves independents. And when we go out and we measure, right, partisan beliefs and partisan positioning, we see exactly that story. This white area here indicates a growth, right, or an expansion of the area that people are in, that they don't think the parties are working for them there, right? What parties are standing for, there's this gap between them. That corresponds with all those folks that call themselves independents, because they say, well, I used to be a Republican, but my party moved away, and so I used to be a Democrat, and my party has become more on the left side, and I'm still here in the middle, wishing there was some group I could work with, right? We've got data that shows that that's actually happening, right? We can see it happening, and that's what this chart represents, right? Is this growth of the independent voter, or the non-committed, right, voter to a political party. When you think of the libertarians and the liberals and the conservatives and populists, and you try to put them on a spectrum from one to the other, This is where you would see it, right? Is in a chart that looks something like this. Um, and remember, when we took the political compass, you were getting questions that were on one of two uh, focuses. So, how much government are you willing to use to promote equality? How much government are you willing to use to promote social order? And social order, right? Control of society, equality in society. These are the two spectrums that fill out that political compass. And you can see the ideological groups, not necessarily the parties, although you see the up here you've got the parties kind of here and here, and it's appropriate but approximate. But you see these other right ideological groupings that fit more in with that. And so when you hear people talking about the Democrats or communists, I want you to see the Democrat or the donkey is here by liberal. It's not over here by communism. It's adjacent, but not in socialism, right? Those are really different. And we see people talk about right the Republicans as right fascist. They're moving that way, right? There's some the Trumpers are probably a lot closer to authoritarianism, right? And but there's a whole lot of conservatives that are here and not over there. They want control of society, but not necessarily that much. And that's what this kind of perspective here is showing us, right? Is this on a linear scale, right, where it's laid out from one side of the spectrum to the other. This is following the parties based upon demographics, right? How the party voted based on demographics. So you can. This is a 2012 election, so this is the Obama and Romney election, right? I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. McCain was before that, right? Anyway, so what you're looking at here, right, is if you were to pick out a demographic group of, say, how did Hispanic Democrats vote, right? You would see that of the Hispanics, right, the Democrats, they were right, 71% of the Hispanics voted Democrat and 27% voted Republican, right? So that's how you would come in here to look at that and see how this breaks down, right? So you can grab a lot of interesting information from charts like this. There's a 2016 one out there that I didn't get stuck in this slide set, but you can look at that for the Trump Clinton election, right? A year or so after the election this November, we'll have another one for Trump and Biden, right? And you can look at the effect of education and how right it works, and the effect of income, party affiliation. I love this one, right? If you call yourself Democrat, you vote Democrat. And if you call yourself Republican, you vote Republican. You call yourself independent, guess what? That group is split between the two. So that makes a lot of sense, right? So this is an interesting thing that you can learn, right, about where votes are based and how they correlate with certain demographics, right? And there's an adage out there, a political adage out there, that if you're young and not a Democrat, if you're yeah, young and not a Democrat, then you're mean, and if you're old and not a Republican, then you're not very smart, right? What that's telling you is that you're more liberal and listening to people's problems when you're younger, and you're looking more after control and order as you get older, and that makes sense. And if you look at the ages, you can see the younger you are, the more democratic you are, right? The older you are, the more you'll tend to correlate toward the Republican side of things, and that's right. That's consistent over time, which means as you move up through age, you tend to move from liberal to conservative. Shock, right? So anyway, these are some interesting demographics to look at and kind of understand. Oh, there it is. I did get it in here. Here's the chart for the 16 election, right? So this is Democrats and Republicans for the same things in the 16 election. So same import there, just different data. And here's just two issues, how they've changed over time and how the support for them have changed over time. Showing you, right, that our society does change its views, right? Society does, right? Sometimes there's a clear arc of change that is happening in our society, right? This is views on same-sex marriage, right? And you can see that we've fairly consistently been moving toward a position that a majority position that same-sex marriage is okay. This is the 50% line right here. You can see that half of the population by about 2013 or so was of the opinion that it was okay. 45% were still against it. And there's a group apparently in the middle that was like, not sure, right? But it's gone up, right? And so now we're looking at what is that, 38% or so versus that's 60 there, so that's 56. 38 and 56 is 94. So we still got about 6% or whatever that's like, not sure. Here, right, this one is going back and forth, right? And what corresponds here to this is who's in power and what the argument it is over immigration at the time. So this is a very unsettled issue for us. It's starting, right, to change so that the general perspective is going up on that immigrants are a strength for our country as opposed to a burden for our country, right? We're coming to, although you see here it's flattening out at this point, I mean, just not changing. This attitude is starting to solidify. Well, this one is still growing. So, right, these kind of things, right, they move. All right, so there you go. We're done with this chapter.